Good evening, everyone. Quick look here at the North American equity markets, and it was somewhat of a quiet trading day ahead of a big earnings week. The Dow and S&P essentially flat on the day. The Nasdaq was up by about close to 1%, and the Russell 2000 saw some buybacks, so that was up by about 1.15%. We also saw the reopening plays in the United States perform well, so energy, airlines, cruise ships, certainly leading the markets higher. We did, however, see industrials as well as healthcare stocks down on the day. WTI was down by about 0.4%, but certainly closed off the worst levels of the day. It is definitely a big earnings week in the United States. 25% of the companies have already reported with record earnings beats, 24% above expectations. So a real record since they started to keep track of this back in about 2008. It seems as though when we think about earnings, though, and the stock reactions being somewhat muted despite those nice gains, likely because we are hearing from company managements that the input costs are increasing. And also, of course, the potential looming corporate tax rate in the United States moving higher could also pressure earnings and therefore also valuations. So certainly be aware of that. In fact, JP Morgan is out with a report saying that if the corporate tax rate rises to 28%, that will impact S&P 500 earnings to the tune of $8 to $9 in 2022. If it is raised to 25%, that will impact S&P 500 earnings by $5. So just keep that in mind as we think about where valuations are, and depending on your stocks, if they're overvalued or undervalued or stretched valuations, that might have a bit of an impact. Also, of course, we're going to hear from the Fed this week, the FOMC meeting, and we'll be wondering whether or not there might be any hints of Fed tapering. Of course, we learned that from the BOC last week. Pulling back on the bond buying program. Now, of course, we've heard from the Fed time and time again that they are not going to move too early. They want to make sure that we are going to see 2% plus inflation. So maybe not too much of a fear, but certainly maybe a little bit of an overhang in the market. We also had economic data in the United States today. Durable goods did miss expectations. It was up by 0.5% versus 2.5% expected, but core did come in a little bit above expectations. So again, we're watching the economic data very closely because, of course, that will lead itself into what the Fed may or may not do. They want to make sure that the economic recovery is, in fact, very strong. From an interesting headline perspective, a couple points to mention. The EU might allow vaccinated Americans to visit this summer. We also heard from the CDC as well as the FDA that they have agreed to resume J&J's one-shot vaccine. We're also, of course, seeing the fifth straight day of record cases in India. So important headlines to, of course, keep in front and center. Apple announced that they are going to be accelerating their investments in the United States, more than $430 billion. That will create 20,000 jobs. Spotify, that stock was actually up by about 5% today. They are going to be increasing prices for many of their subscriptions in the UK as well as the EU, and also increasing the US family plan. In terms of other items to watch, JP Morgan, from a headline perspective, also pretty interesting here. They're going to be offering a Bitcoin fund to their wealthy clients as soon as this summer. Speaking of which, QBTC, a fund that I always look at, was up by over 5% today. Of course, there was pressure on Bitcoin last week. TSX was up mildly on the day to the tune of 0.4%. Healthcare, so cannabis companies and tech leading the way higher. The TSX was down by about 1.3% last week, really weighed down by tech and energy stocks. Canadian dollar is higher versus that US dollar today. Now, in terms of Canadian headlines to be mindful of, Canada is in the third wave. The ICU admissions are on the rise. Ontario has formally requested medical aid from the Canadian military to handle the surge in COVID cases. And Canada will, however, receive 1.9 million vaccine doses this week. And of course, we've been watching closely the Montreal dock workers on strike. It is expected that the government will file a back-to-work legislation. Canadian stocks to watch, Shopify, CIBC, as well as Bear did downgrade the price target ahead of their earnings, which will be this Wednesday. Forestry stocks were up nicely today. Cable was mixed, but Shaw was up by 1.5%, so a clear outperformer within the telecom space. BCE did confirm that it had bid for Shaw before Rogers was able to get the deal done with Shaw. Away from that, we are also, of course, seeing the fight continue for Kansas City Southern Rail in the United States between CP and CN Rail. CP sending a letter to Kansas City saying that there is an anti-competitive nature from the other offer. So be mindful of that. Enbridge stock was lower despite the fact that Canada is considering more drastic options with respect to the response they're getting from the Biden administration on line 5. And what to watch for this week, earnings. And we're going to see a ton of tech companies report their most recent results. Tesla, do watch this stock tomorrow. It looks as though it is trading lower on the back of their most recent results out tonight after the closing bells. Stock looks to be down maybe about 3% or so. We've also got Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Apple, as well as Amazon reporting this week. And also Shopify, as I mentioned. The FOMC meeting will be on Wednesday. So a lot to watch this week, that is for sure. And Canadian retail sales will be on Wednesday. Expectations are for a 4% rise. That's after a 1.1% decline in January. And GDP, Canadian GDP, will be out this Friday as well. So quite a bit to watch. CNI, also, they reported their most recent results after the closing bells today. Operating ratio, perhaps not as good as investors were expecting. So definitely a lot to follow this week. We'll catch up a little bit later.